Our second town meeting session. Tonight we'll be going over what we refer to as the general government budget or the town budget. We did the school budget on Monday night. We also did what we call our shared cost budgets, or really our fixed cost budgets in the facilities department. Tonight you're going to hear from me on most of the town budgets, and we have a couple of our department heads with larger budgets that you're going to hear from, including the police chief, the fire chief, and the public works director. As we go through the budget, if you have questions, feel free to just raise your hands. We have copies of the budget book here. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, you can certainly grab one. If you are watching at home or from the computer and you want to get a budget book, we do have them here and they're available at the clerk's office. It's also available online. If we skip past the department budget and then a little while later you have a question, by all means, just say, hey, can we go back to that particular question? Most of our general government department heads are here tonight and we'll be able to answer any questions that anyone has. It'll seem like it goes a little bit quicker because a lot of the town budgets are actually small offices. If you think of the clerk's office, it's really just 4 employees in a small office budget. The building department is 5 employees in a small office budget. But we're more than happy to answer any questions, explain how anything works, any of this. Are there any questions before we get started? All right, we're going to jump right in. And first up, we have Chief Brooks, who will be going over the police budget. And he's going to start by just giving you a little bit of an overview of the police department operations. About half of the general government budget is made up of public safety, which is police and fire. Chief, we're going to get right into it. Floor is yours. Okay. Clicker is yours.
The next one will be the first line.
We'll see.
We'll see if that happens. Okay.
Well, thanks for coming out. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the operations of the police department really briefly. So obviously, part of what we do is enforcement and safety. During the pandemic, our traffic enforcement dipped, as a lot of agencies did, as we tried to minimize contact with the motoring public. But things are where they were before, but we've retooled a little bit, and our stops are up from where they were pre-pandemic. And we're also focusing more greatly on those kinds of violations that we know through evidence and data cause crashes are more likely to cause to increase the severity of crashes. So we had 700. We look at calendar year 2002 just to give you a full year. Last year we had 782 crashes. We stopped 5,270 vehicles. That's up. That's probably close to a 15-20% increase from the year before. Our officers wrote over 5,000 citations. So again, our concentration has been on distracted driving, failure to yield for pedestrians, red light violations, stop signs, speed, and other violations that we know are more likely to cause crashes or increase crash severity. We made 175 motor vehicle related arrests. So a large group of those are OUIs and driving on a suspended license, and some of them are connected to motor vehicle crashes. We issued 1,500 parking tickets. You'll see an increase in 2023. We're now using traffic supervisors a few days a week, who between them morning and afternoon crossing are in the business district, issuing more parking tickets for overtime parking. Outside the motor vehicle area, we made 239 arrests, many of those for domestics, aggravated assault, that sort of thing. And then we had 47 PCs, in other words, people placed in protective custody, and sections. So that's kind of a combination of substance abuse custodies and custodies related to mental health. We do a lot in community trust in our department. We spend a lot of time and a lot of effort doing outreach to the community. So a good example is these are not officers assigned to beats. These are cruiser officers that sign off and do a foot patrol, school coming in, school recess, walking one of the neighborhoods, walking the business district, 5,000 foot patrols where cruiser officers sign off to do a foot patrol engaged with the community, 1,000 school visits. We, since last spring, every single school day have been having officers sign off at schools as those kids are being dropped off. And it also includes recesses, and the officers are stopping in at schools to check on conditions inside schools. We run 2 youth academies. We started with 1 a year. Now it's 2 a year. And last year we put 55 kids through. These are solely 8th graders that learn about crime scenes and traffic safety and spend time with the officers, and state police land a helicopter. State police crime lab sends criminalists and chemists out to talk to the kids, and then the kids actually work mock crime scenes. We've moved that operation, by the way, to the high school. It used to be at the police station, but now we just need more room. So those mock crime scenes, I think last year we set up 8 various crime scenes throughout the high school. And the kids have to go figure out what probably happened, take notes, recover evidence, and they apply everything that they learned from the state police crime lab. We do a national night out, which is held in August. We've done last year and the year before. They're hugely successful with people coming out to meet us, talk to the officers, talk one-on-one. All of the other events we go to, we're going to somebody else's event. This is our event. And we're getting, well, we can't count people because of the way the common's set up. All we can count is hot dogs. So I think we do about 500 hot dogs a year, give you a sense for the attendance. But it's been a big hit. And then Officer Diego Silva, who was born in Brazil, he and I visit the Brazilian churches. We try to do it once a year. We weren't able to do that during COVID, but that picture was actually taken from just a couple of months ago, where we visit the Brazilian church, talk to them about policing in Norwood, what they can expect and not expect. We really want to have a feeling of a relationship of trust and to get along with the parents, and half the people there are kids. And it seems to be working when it's all over. They just want to have their pictures taken with us and talk to us one-on-one and that sort of thing. So that's been enormously successful. We want to be a welcoming community, and we want to be a welcoming department to people who come here from other countries. And it does seem to be working. And Dr. Silva not only is there to help me with that messaging, and because he's from Brazil, but he translates. So as I speak and message, he then does the translation. He then also translates their questions. I think sometimes he tells me stuff that he tells them stuff I haven't said, but it all seems to be a positive experience all around. And then we spend an awful lot of time on training and education. We train about twice as much as what the state mandate calls for. So last year, a total of nearly 6,000 hours in the police department. Now we have officers on Metro SWAT. They train a lot. We have CPR and first responder training, which is required of all sworn personnel. We train in use of force, defensive tactics, criminal investigation, mental health response, 911. This year, also officer wellness, also hate crimes. And then we also send officers out for investigative schools. All of our officers train on mental health first aid, and about half our patrol force is CIT certified, which is for crisis intervention team. And that's a full week of training that focuses on serving people who have mental illness. And like I said, the state mandates 40 hours per officer annually, and we do just around double that. Then as far as the numbers are kind of self-explanatory. You know, the salaries are really driven by the salaries that are paid to the members of the department, mostly to our officers, but also civilian personnel, and then folded into that also is overtime that it takes to run the department. And then our operating expenses. You see the number going into this year should be about 648,000. That's everything from office supplies to materials we purchase for training, some materials that we need for some of those events I showed you, the equipping of our officers, and that's driven by contract. Each of the officers gets a certain allotment of money to spend on their equipment. So although we give them an initial allotment of equipment, then they get an allotment of money that they spend throughout the year to replace worn out leather gear, pants that get ripped, and jackets that get sold. So there's the total number, 10 million, just a little bit over $10 million for the year for the department. And that's us. And by the way, and I probably should have opened with this, we are at, right now, as you know, we're transitioning to a regional dispatch center, both us and fire. So there's a little bit of transition going on there in communications. But on our sworn personnel, we have 65 officers, and that's our newest patrolman, up to the deputy chief and chief, and then civilian support staff as well. Yes, sir.
On contractual increases, what is contractual increases?
So that's when the contracts are negotiated and officers are given a raise in pay, typically a raise in pay every year. It's that.
Collective bargaining agreement, union contract.
Union contract.
Union contract.
They get raises every year. It's like a 3-year raise, or it's spread over a couple of years?
Typically, the town settles a contract for 3 years.
Yeah.
But each of those years, the officers get a raise.
Oh, so then beginning of the 4th year, it's looked at again?
So what happened this last cycle is that the police department had just settled contract negotiations when COVID came along and kind of everything hit the brakes. So we were the only ones with that had negotiated a contract at that point. So there was 1 year of catch up, so that we've now caught up. But to answer your question, what happens is that we negotiate a contract, police negotiate a contract that covers 3 years. They get raises every year, and coming into that 3rd year of the contract, they notify the town that they would like to begin negotiations for the next contract, and that cycle begins again. It's more of an HR question, I guess, but all of the unions within the town government side are on the same negotiation cycle. Their contracts all expire at the same time, and all the negotiations take place simultaneously.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So if I look at the numbers, I'm trying to do the math in my head. So it looks like about a 5% increase on average for salaries.
No, the salaries for the most part they got a 1% raise for the officers, and they also got 2% on top of that for being within an accredited department, which sounds a lot like a raise, but it's dependent on the department remaining accredited. So added together, that's 3%. There also are some stipends that are in there for some officers. For instance, the officers that we use to break in new officers, field training officers, get a stipend on top of that. So I think of some of the other raises that will be on the salary side.
Yeah, I was just looking at the numbers from 23 to 24 on the salaries. It looks like 5%, but
yeah, those aren't all in. That's not all. When you say salaries, the salaries part of the budget includes overtime. All right, so some of the overtime might be above that 3% mark, depending on what we're spending the overtime on. So, they're broken out into court overtime, ship replacement overtime, the overtime we spend on kind of everything else, overtime we spend on training.
It includes things like education incentives. So sometimes there's a change every year based on somebody's education level. So with 65 officers, 2 of them may get master's degrees. That causes an increase. So if you go to the lines in the budget book, as the chief said, it breaks out everything that makes up salaries. The reason we usually show it this way with salaries and operating, this is how the state has us approve budgets. So the chief has control over a salary line. You can't move between your salaries and your operating budget either way. So if the chief had an extra $100,000 in the operating budget, and he said, gee, I've got an overtime issue that I've got to solve, town meeting has to then make that change to appropriation. You also can't move money from this budget to the fire budget or to the town manager's office budget or the clerk's budget. The full breakdowns of the budget.
Thank you.
Can I answer anything else?
Chief, could you talk a minute about accreditation? What it means, since you have to go through?
So as it turns out, my deputy chief, Chris Padden, is here, and he's the one who actually got us accredited. I think it's a struggle that has been going on in the department for a long time to try to get us to that point. We were able to dedicate quite a bit of his time back when he was a patrolman, actually, and he did the work to get us there. He could tell me how many accreditation standards the department meets. I think we have in the area of close to 90 different policies, operating policies on the department. And then each of those have accreditation standards within them that we have to meet. So, we bring an outside firm to audit our evidence room and property room every year. And they put their hands on 5,400 pieces of evidence and property that are in that room, and everything is exactly what it's supposed to be, properly accounted for, and that sort of thing. And then we pay that firm to do that, write us a report, and make policy recommendations, and then we implement it. And that's just evidence. We review every high-speed pursuit. We review every use of force. We report force to the National Use of Force data collection. There are standards, operating standards for virtually everything we do, from administration through criminal investigation to patrol operations, right through the agency. So it's a heavy lift, particularly on the accreditation manager. We now have a couple of lieutenants assisting him with that. And we are in, I want to say, our third round. Accreditation is good for 3 years, and we are currently in our third round. And we come up for it every 3 years. And they've gone from just checking us every 3 years to checking us annually, to making sure that not only does our policy call for implementation of these standards, but we can show where that's going on. Now, show us the pursuit review from last year. Show us all of your use of force oversight. Show us the documentation of your training. Show us the lesson plans that go along with the training you did on this topic. Show us where you trained on de-escalating and all of that sort of thing. So we're very proud of the fact that we're an accredited agency. It means a great deal to me, and I know members of the department as well. Yeah, Deputy.
Just real quick, it's important to note, out of the 300 plus cities and towns in the state of Massachusetts, less than a quarter of them are accredited at the level that we're accredited at. And it really goes towards the best practices amongst police and what nationally is recognized. So the fact that we've been able to do that and continue to do that drives a lot of what we have to do as far as training and what the standards are for the police officers that we hire and what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Other questions I can answer?
Thank you. Ed has a question. Ed, you can go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I was just looking at the numbers in the budget book based on the overtime. And I got to ask, general overtime seems to have jumped quite a bit between, what was it, 22 and 23, and that seems to be what's expected. And it was a threefold increase overall. And I have to ask this question because when I was new many, many years ago, and I asked this question, it was, we're got enough people. We know we have enough people, and this is just the way things have to be done. But we're at, over $587,000 in overtime right now. And I just wonder, has anybody looked at this from a study standpoint to say, maybe it's better if we hire more police rather than continuing to pay this amount of overtime?
So Ed, I'll start with that one. There's always a question about, is it better to hire more officers than pay overtime? In Massachusetts, it's actually better to pay the overtime, and I'll explain why. As long as you're not overworking a department. We have a pension system in Massachusetts. We talked about it Monday. It's the same pension system for every state employee and every city and town employee throughout Massachusetts. You don't pay a pension on overtime. So right away, when you bring in another employee, you're paying a pension cost for that employee. You're adding that cost to your vote. And it's about 20% of payroll is what the town ends up paying for an actuarial rate. So if you took $100,000 of overtime and said, just hire an officer, you're not only getting the cost of that officer, of equipping them, of training them. Officers spend months in the academy. You add all that in, plus the pension cost, plus the health insurance cost. And remember that health insurance cost goes up average 4 to 7% a year. On top of that, we pay retiree healthcare in Massachusetts. Every city and town does. It's a state mandate. Every employee we add to the rolls, we take on that retiree healthcare liability. Overtime doesn't have a retiree healthcare liability. It's the same employee. It doesn't have a pension liability. It doesn't have the additional Medicare, the additional insurance, the additional training that we have to pay. So as long as you're not forcing people in and overworking them for too long, it is actually better to pay the overtime than try to bring people in to be able to account for that.
Well, I understand everything you're saying. I guess the question really is then, where's the break point when it is more cost effective to bring somebody in? Because if we're always going to be looking at an overtime that's, in the 600,000 range, when do we say that, okay, we really do have to bring some more people in?
So I can give you an example. $600,000 in overtime, and you can never completely eliminate overtime. You're always going to have people out sick, people on vacation, people out injured. $600,000 we could maybe hire 5 officers for. That would add 1 officer per shift 24/7 with enough coverage to make sure they're covered when they're out. So you'd have to see, would that $600,000 reduce $600,000 in the overtime? And the answer is I don't think it would. Chief?
Yeah, so, and it's also that it's not all shift work. And it's very much not all shift work. So some of it goes to training. It's when you have to, we can't just pull cars off the road down to go training because they get called out. We do about 20,000 radio runs in the course of a year. And that doesn't include about another 8,000 officer initiated, like the the stops at the schools and the foot patrols and that sort of thing. So we can't train people while they're on shift. We have to train them when they're off shift, and we can pay them overtime to be trained, or we can bring officers in off the road and backfill their shifts. It doesn't make any difference to us, honestly, because it costs the same. Officers get.
I'm not arguing that at all in any way, shape, or form. What I'm asking is what number triggers more hiring? Because we're going to pay overtime. It's just a given. But that's what I'm asking. Has anybody looked at it to say, when do we realize that our overtime does mean we really need to hire somebody?
Sure. You're not really going to have that number, and there's a reason. Remember, the overtime isn't just shift replacement. I'll give you an example where we spend a lot of overtime, the 4th of July parade. How many officers do we bring in for 4th of July?
Everybody.
So that's a significant cost as an example. Covering events like that is a significant portion of that overtime cost. So we could hire 25 more officers and no, we're not doing that. I know you'd love to, Chief. You're not going to really reduce that overtime cost. On that particular day, we need to surge to 30 or 40 or 50 officers. So we at some point do need to do an overall public safety staffing study. We haven't comprehensively looked at police and fire staffing in quite a while, but I don't know if you're ever going to hit that overtime number where if you're fully staffed and nobody's at the academy and nobody's out injured, where you can say, we've hit this number and just hire people and reduce it. Not while we're maintaining the same shift coverage, and that's what our staffing level is really driven to do. We try to maintain a certain patrol coverage at different points throughout the day. Adjusting that up or down might have an impact on that overtime, but you can't go too low. And certainly if we were to add staff, you'd be able to go higher. But
Oh yeah, no, I fully get it, and I fully appreciate everything that, you know, the department does. And I'm not saying we should be cutting anything. What I'm just trying to say is maybe we should be looking at that study sooner rather than later, so that we really have some indicators, so we know, well, now it's definitely going to change and we have to hire.
absolutely. A little birdie told me there's going to be a request at the fall town meeting, but I can't guarantee that. There's a lot of steps it has to go through.
Tony?
Yeah.
Just kind of an information point for, especially for our new town meeting members, is in your budget books, it's also going to show you the trending. So in this particular item, and I'm not obviously on Switzerland, but you can see that the 300,000 range actually has been probably the consistent range for overtime since going back to 2020. There's 1 year where it's 440, and then 1 year when it goes down to 240. But it's roughly been pretty stable. And I just recommend to town meeting members that, again, the budget book, take a look at it, take a look at the trending before you come into town meeting, because you get a lot of information and a good sense for these various subcategories that don't be part of the motion. So.
Absolutely. Although if Ed hadn't asked the question, I wouldn't have gotten to talk about OPEB and retiree healthcare liability. It's always my favorite thing to talk about. Further questions for Chief Brooks? All right, we'll move on to the next section. The chief will be here, and he'll be here certainly after if anyone has additional questions, and we can circle back to it. Now we're going to turn over to the fire department. I want to introduce a man I've come to know well that folks may not know. This is Chief Wright. Chief is the interim chief for the town of Norwood, as we're in the process of selecting a new fire chief. We will have a chief shortly. He comes to us having recently retired from Sharon. He retired on a Friday and agreed to do an interim gig starting on that Monday. So he hasn't had any time off since he retired, but he's a fantastic chief. He's done a great job for us and will continue to. I'm going to turn it over to him. Chief, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Glad to see everybody here tonight. First thing I wanted to kick the meeting off with is to kind of tell you a few of the things that we do out there. You probably know several of them, but we'll go over them. Fire, medical, and what we like to say, all hazard emergency response. So I like to say that when you don't know who to call, you call the fire department, because we pretty much try to adapt to do anything to assist the citizens with whatever issue they may have out there. And our partners in blue help us out with that in that same vein. Fire prevention, inspections for all residential and commercial property. So what that really means is, if you sell your house, we have to come in and inspect your smoke detectors. If you do a renovation and add a bedroom or anything like that, we come in and inspect the new smoke detectors that you put in. If you put in an oil burner system, we inspect the furnace, the oil tank. If you want us to come by and just do a general safety inspection for you, you can call up and we'll come over and just do a general fire safety inspection for you, give you ideas on, you know, storage of different materials, et cetera. So really quite busy. And then on the commercial side, as you know, we do for the new school that's coming in, we spend many hours and days reviewing plans, doing inspections throughout the whole construction process. And that happens with all the commercial buildings in town. We work very closely with the building department, making sure that we build safe facilities here in the community. And then fire safety education, we come out into the schools, we do school programs, we try to work with the seniors. Again, we're glad to come out and do safety inspections for seniors. We help can talk about tripping hazards. You know, a big part of our job is emergency medicals, and we see a lot of trip and falls of the elderly, et cetera. So we can help, you know, give ideas of not to have the throw carpet where it's going to bunch up and you'll trip on it, and all those extension cords underneath the rug. That's a big no-no, so don't do that. You know, where if you use candles, the appropriate use of candles. We actually have a fair number of fires started by candles because they're placed in the wrong area. Somebody may put them on an end table next to a couch, and it's by a curtain. The window's open, the curtain blows over the candle, catches on fire, starts. So all those little types of helpful hints we certainly can help with. And then, of course, we're here for whatever events are going on in the community. A, to provide emergency response if needed, and B, to be there to meet the citizens of the community. We love the younger children because they love fire trucks, so we like to show our big toys off, and they really enjoy it. I invite people to stop by the station. As long as we're not out doing calls, we'll be glad to bring you around, show you some of the equipment we use. Obviously, jaws of life, all those interesting things that we have. We have a tool to do many different things, so we love to let the community see what it is that your dollars are going for in the community. So over the last 12 months, we did 6,630 calls for service, 5,261 for rescue and emergency medical incidents. So as you can see, by far, emergency medical services is the bulk of work that we do. That's not just the ambulance going out the door. That's usually a crew going with them because we have to extricate a patient from the second floor. If it's a motor vehicle accident, it could require removing people from cars, if there's any hazards, fuel spills, etc. So it's not just a one person goes out to or a 2-person ambulance crew. It's usually a crew of up to 6 people that shows up at an incident because we got a lot of equipment we bring in. We try to treat the patient right at where they are because that's the best course of action, especially for anybody that's really sick. There's a lot of things we can do immediately that can help them. Then we'll package them and move them out to the ambulance and transport to the hospital. So really busy. 99 of those incidents over the past 12 months were fires of varying types, from structure fires to outside fires, etc. And then 1,270 were other various incidents such as fire alarm activations, water problems, you name it. There's a numerous types of things that we go out there for to assist the citizens. Our fire prevention inspection, talked a little bit about it, but over the past 12 months, we did 168 required inspections, and that includes, for example, the nursing facilities are required to be inspected every 3 months. The schools, we come in and do at least one annual inspection in addition to our fire safety drills that we have to do quarterly. And there's a whole variety of different inspections we do. Commercial properties will come through. Some of them are required to be done every year. 413 residential smoke and CO. That's when you sell your house. We have to come in and inspect it to make sure that your detectors are properly installed. And it's based off whatever code your house was built to. So there's about 4 or 5 different versions of code that your personal homes have to meet. So if you're an older house, it's battery operated, 10-year battery. If it's a newer house, it's hardwired, interconnected, et cetera. So we look at all that to make sure that you meet whatever code your building was built. So whoever moves in is safe from that point forward. And then the other residential and commercial inspections include, as I said, oil burners, but we also come out and do the building permit inspection. So we have to review the plans, then we have to go out on site visits as the construction project happens. So those numbers may not be right, but when you're talking about doing a school building or the Moderna facilities, which we have a number of permits going on right now, it's almost a daily event that the fire prevention division is heading out to check on permits, see what the status is, make sure that sprinklers are going in correctly, the smoke fire alarm systems are all going in correctly. We work, again, real close with the building department, making sure the sites themselves are safe as the construction is happening. So it's really a very busy group within the organization. And then the budget, you can see the numbers. It's up quite a bit from last year. A big part of that is the fact that we were out of contract for 2 years, and this is this budget year actually has the culmination of those 2 years into this. So we did some in this fiscal year. We had to pay previous fiscal years funding, so it actually, the increase seems much larger than if it was, you know, stepped because of the fact that we were out of contract for 2 years. So that's part of the big numbers. And if you talk about overtime, that's always a challenge, as was already discussed. We're a 24/7 operation. We try to keep 15 firefighters on duty 24/7. You know, overtime is typically higher through the summer season because that's a vacation season. So you're going to have a lot of people that want to take time off, and to try to keep the staffing number up to that 15 minimum, we spend a lot of money in overtime. However, when you go through the winter, not as many people are taking time off, so that number goes down, and that kind of leads to the reason that you really don't always want we always want extra bodies, but economically it's not feasible, because when you hire somebody, they're there 365 days a year. Well, you may not need them for the 365 days. So that's why overtime, in addition to the financial impacts, is also sometimes better. And again, as Tony mentioned, the balance point really is the fact that you don't want to overwork your people, have them working too much, because tired and overworked public safety personnel are not good for anybody. So we try to maintain that balance of personnel, having a sufficient number of personnel on the shift, and then using the right amount of people to work that overtime, such that, you know, we're not overworking everybody. And it gets difficult because it varies. You know, there are averages, of course, but we'll have certain years that we have more people that are out for various reasons, whether they're long-term sick or injured. And then we'll have years where we'll have less. So sometimes you will see some fluctuation in that number, but generally speaking, it's not cheap to pay overtime, but ultimately it's actually the more economical for the town to do it that way. So I don't know if there's any specific questions I can help with. Sure.
Yep. In the budget book, as you go through the line items, there's one line item that tends to jump out at me in terms of percentage change. It has to do with EMT pay. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That was the EMT stipend that the firefighters received. So in this recent contract, previously, the firefighters, we had kind of, I'll call it 3 classes of EMTs. So class 1 is the roughly half the department is on the ambulance all the time. They rotate through on the ambulance all the time. Class 2 are EMTs that work on the ambulance, but it's mainly filling in when the class 1 EMTs are out. And then class 3 is they really didn't ride on the ambulance at all. Well, we're finding that it's difficult to recruit personnel and especially paramedics. So our class 1 EMTs, we have a fair number of EMT basics and not as many EMT paramedics, which is, we provide ALS service. I think it was a year or two ago, we went to two full ALS ambulances that we provide. Used to be one BLS, one ALS, now we have 2. So the number of people we need. So basically what happened is we increased the stipend. So the stipend was roughly half of what the class 1 EMTs got. Now the class 2 get the same stipend that the class 1 get. So that they're moving into those roles, working on the ambulance much more frequently than they did in the past. And so it caused a significant increase in the overall expense, but it's really such that those personnel are working on the ambulance much more, and they're trained to that level. We have very often in town more than 2 ambulance calls going on at a time. So a fire engine is coming out and doing initial care until a mutual aid ambulance can come in. So those are the people that are called those class 2 EMTs, and they're providing direct care to the patients on a very frequent basis. The other day we had 6 calls in a half hour. It's amazing how busy we can get very quickly. So
What we basically did is you get paid a certain level for having that certification. Prior to the system we have now, there was a basic riding rate, a basic non-riding rate, a paramedic riding rate, a paramedic non-riding rate. And the fire department, so if you thought what the chief said was confusing, it was worse before. We also had 3 seniority systems. There's no other department in the town where if you were required to or could achieve a certain certification, you didn't get paid that certification for your entire time. So a teacher, for instance, gets a master's degree, they get bumped up to a level. A DPW driver, a DPW employee gets a CDL license, you get paid a certain amount for having a CDL license. The fire department was a little strange that it was, well, if you have it, you're going to get this, but if you're riding actively on an ambulance, you're not getting it. And what we had was situations where we'd hire paramedics, they weren't able to ride on that paramedic ambulance yet, so they didn't get the same rate, and our wages were really not competitive for paramedics. So we've gone to the same system that every other department does, that if you're a paramedic, if this is your certification level, this is what you're going to get paid. And it's allowed us to now offer 2 ALS ambulances. We used to have an advanced and a basic, and I'll let the chief describe the differences, but now both ambulances are advanced paramedic ambulances. I'm sure the chief can explain the difference between basic and ALS better than I can.
So an EMP basic is kind of I'll call it a basic first aid. So EMTs can obviously splint people, take care of, bleeding. We can give oral aspirin to help if you're having a heart attack, things like that. Whereas a paramedic, they can do EKGs, intubation, they can do chest decompression, stick needles in because you got air buildup in there so that your lungs can expand properly. They push a variety of cardiac medications, which are, very important should an individual be having a heart attack. It helps prevent. They push pain medications, fentanyl. There's a number of things. It's a significantly higher level of care brought right to the patient's side. And in a lot of calls, it doesn't make, that much difference, but there's those calls that it does make a difference. It makes a huge difference and really can mean the difference between life and death for the person we're working on. So it's really valuable to have that resource coming to your side all the time, because we don't know what the patient's condition is really until we get there, do an assessment, and then we provide the care. So having those resources are incredibly, it's the standard today. There's very few, especially, fairly populated areas like ours that don't have paramedic service coming right out.
There's a small, I'll go again in just a second. There's a small revenue enhancement there. We do bill for ambulance service. Every city and town does. You bill out more for an ALS call, even if it's just the ALS ambulance going out. If it's the same thing, you please don't call the ambulance if you stub your toe. But if you stub the toe, depending on who responds, it changes the level that you're able to bill out at. So the cost of providing the service goes up, but we'll actually generate additional revenue from it as well. And the board, we mentioned this, I think, the other night. The board of selectmen has been pretty aggressive in making sure we're raising our rates to the level that we can. Medicare, Medicaid set a limit, of course, but with private insurance, we're about 25% private pay, which is fairly normal for an area like ours. We raise rates when we can to make sure we're recovering money. The ambulance service brings in over $2 million in revenue. We did a cost study, I think 3 years ago, looking at, well, what are we spending on the ambulance service versus what we're taking in? Because when the town set up its ambulance service, there was, at the time, it was, well, we may not make enough money to cover it, but we're willing to spend a few $100,000 to have an ambulance service. And we were still right around that level of maybe it was costing us $200,000 to $300,000 a year when you look at the total cost of providing ambulance service versus what we get in. Now it's probably about a break even, but there's an additional benefit to operating an ambulance service, because even if you said, gee, we really want to cut that $100,000 a year, 4 of them are on an ambulance, but depending on the type of emergency we're facing, we can swing all 15 one way or the other. So if you didn't have an ambulance service, you over time will lose paramedics. They probably wouldn't work for us. It's very difficult to become a paramedic. It's not just a 2-night weekend class. You were in school for months. There are complicated tests that you got to take. I mean, you understand some of the things that Chief was talking about they do. It's really a mobile emergency room in a lot of ways. So they go through a lot of training. We wouldn't be able to hire paramedics if we didn't have an ambulance service. So the ability to have 15 people, many of whom are trained as paramedics on duty in the town of Norwood at any given time, is a huge asset. You can also flex the other way, where we have 15 people we can put on fire if we ever had a significant fire situation where we needed to. We staff 4 in the ambulances, the rest on fire, but that ability to flex those extra 4 bodies and keeping all that paramedic and EMT training for what's really cost neutral or $100,000 or $200,000 a year is actually a huge benefit. Not counting benefits, if the fire department's at $9 million, if you added the benefits and at 10 or 12, $2.5 million they bring in an ambulance revenue. So it's a pretty good revenue generating department in that sense. We care about the level of care, but it does make money. Any other questions for Chief? All right, he'll be here right to the end until we finish. Oh, thank you. I'm going to bring up Mark Ryan to go over Public Works in just a minute, but I wanted to expand on something Chief Wright said just for a moment. That's always important to remember with public safety. They both are 24/7, 365 operations. They never stop. At no point do they ever stop. They're really the only departments, other than in emergency situations where people are ordered into work, where we need to maintain a certain level of coverage. So sometimes calculations for things like shift replacement and overtime and what the training budget is going to be is always challenging, because they will operate 365 days a year no matter what. We never have the luxury of what we do with other departments where we can say, hey, town hall's going to close today. It's summer, the kids are going on vacation, schools don't have to operate. You know, the senior center could take a day off, not that they ever do, but we can shut down different buildings and operations. You cannot do that with public safety. So they're going to operate 24/7, 365. DPW does as well. This is Mark Ryan, Town Engineer and Public Works Director. He'll talk about what the DPW does, and I think for those of you who are newer town meeting members, the amount of work that DPW does and the amount of responsibilities they have, by scope, it's probably our largest department in town, even though it's run on a comparatively relatively small budget. Mark, what is yours?
There we go. All right, as Tony said, I'm Mark Ryan, Director of Public Works and Town Engineer. I've been working with the town since 1999. I've been Director of Public Works and Town Engineer since 2009. Just go over some of the things that Public Works does. As Tony said, we do quite a lot of things around town. Our motto is Public Works, part of your life every day. Parks Division, we take great pride in our parks and commons. We maintain 24 athletic fields, totaling 53 acres, various park and common areas. You see the town common, you see Arundel Park, you see DAV Park on Chapel Street and Walpole Street. 9 playground tot lot areas we maintain, working along with the Recreation Department. We're out there maintaining and planting public street trees, and then holiday decorations. We're out there for a lot of the holidays, Memorial Day, Labor Day, 4th of July, fall decorations, Christmas decorations. We're all out there, putting the banners through the center of town, trying to make the town look nice. Cemetery division, we have 2 cemeteries in town. If you didn't know that, the main functional one is Highland Cemetery up on Winter Street. We also have the historic cemetery, the Old Parish Cemetery on the Railroad Avenue, Washington Street, which is a beautiful site. And we're putting a lot of effort into upgrading that cemetery, but those 2 cemeteries total 41 acres in size. We average 208 burials a year, and that's pretty consistent over time. We plant and maintain trees up at the cemetery, plants, bushes, flowers, shrubs, the grass. I mean, we've put a pretty aggressive program on both cemeteries, maintaining the turf grass up there. Basically, we take golf course technology and apply it to the cemetery in our parks and athletic fields. And the cemetery crews up there, they plow the cemetery during the winter, and they also are part of the snow and ice removal operations during the year, during snow and ice season. Highway division, there's quite a bit. We got 434 streets in town, 110 miles that we maintain, 142 miles of sidewalks. We manage the trash and recycling program, snow and ice removal, highway, all the DPW does it, but the highway department really manages it. This year we're taking over the hazardous waste day. Stacy and her staff at the Board of Health have done a great job over the years, and they were so kind to pass it along to us. At Public Works. No, we work along with them anyway, so it's a seamless operations because they set it up so well for us. Pavement marking, street sweeping daily from April 1st right till December 1st. Leaf bag pickup, once again, April 1st to the end of November, and then we carry it on into December for the stragglers. Winter Street recycling facility, I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, driven by it. We do a lot of things up there. It's very well received and well attended. We probably get 700 at a minimum, up to 1,000 a day visit on a Saturdays from 8 to 1:30. And set up and clean up for community events. You name it. It could be a road race, a car wash, Central Street set up right now we have in front of the theater. Like this weekend, there'll be a theater event because we've taken away all the parking and everything in front. We'll set up a drop-off operation there. It's one thing after another, but Public Works is there for everything that's going on in town. Water, sewer, and drain division. I mean, we've got 119 miles of water main. We spent a lot of time maintaining those mains, especially the last 2 years. We've cleaned and lined over 40,000 linear feet of water mains. Fire hydrants, we maintain them. What does that mean? We make sure they're operational. Also, every year we have to winterize, getting ready for the winter. So when the fire department does show up, they're not frozen. Like I said, manage the cleaning and lining project. We've done 2 years of that. We're starting a 3rd project this year, another 20,000 feet of cleaning and lining. So we got a lot going on. 122 miles of sewer, sanitary sewer that we maintain. We're out there daily basis, sewer crew and drain crew, clearing sewer lines, looking, finding blockages. People have their services at home get blocked. They call DPW and we come and clean it. It's a normal operation. And then you got the drain division. You got 95 miles of storm drains that we maintain, cleaning and maintaining catch basins is one thing after another. Vehicle maintenance. I mean, all this work we do, we got a lot of vehicles. So we maintain those vehicles. We have 3 personnel maintaining all the vehicles in Public Works and Cemetery. And we have also maintain and operate the central fueling facility that all the town departments utilize. All right, so we'll go through each little budget here. Public Works, we've got there's a reduction of $188,000. So what that is, for many years, the salaries were all into Public Works. We've broken off into a enterprise fund for sewer, water, and drain. Fiscal 23 was the first year of that. We're trying to figure out what salaries go where. We finally figured it out. In Public Works salaries, we put it off into water, sewer, and drain. It's in the appropriate place now. So is a reduction there, in salaries, but there will be an increase in the sewer and water salaries to offset that. But in the end, we still have the same amount of employees. Since I've been there, since 2009, we haven't added anyone. So there's no change in personnel that would raise the salaries. Engineering, we have an engineering department. I'm the town engineer. There's 2 engineers in that department, assisting other departments, assisting residents, assisting people, developers coming in, want to know what kind of utilities are in the area. They're out there doing engineering work, design work. They're supervising roadway resurfacing projects, water main projects. So they're pretty busy, and there's a reduction in their budget, 13,000. We had a retirement recently, so we had a lower paid skilled person take over. So that's why there's a reduction there. Highway maintenance, a lot going on there, but we're level funded. And we're fine with that. We do quite a bit, pavement markings, line striping, street sweeping, crack sealing, asphalt maintenance. You have it, but we're level funded there. Snow and ice, we have an increase there. That's the norm, is increase it a little bit each year to keep pace with inflation. This year we had a great year. It was awesome. I think we had 15 salt events. That's just sending the salt trucks out, because we had a lot of these little tinky storms, lack of a better term, that we just had to keep the roads safe, but we really only plowed once. So it was a great year for that, but we still have to increase each year just to keep pace with inflation. We got to buy a lot of rock salt, which we use a lot this year, and that will go up next year. So that's a reflection of that. Waste removal, we manage the trash recycling contract. Single stream recycling started in 2008 with Waste Management. It's been a pretty good go with them. We're in negotiations with them. Their contract ends at the end of June this year. We do have for this budget a 10% increase anticipated, but the manager and Selectman Donnelly are working along with Waste Management, and we're getting numbers from other vendors to see who we're going to use starting July 1st. Cemetery, like I said, we have 2 cemeteries up there. We have a reduction in costs up there. We had a retirement of a higher pay scale individual, and we do have COLA, cost of living increases and what have you, but there is a decrease there. And then parks, there is a slight increase, and that's for contract work. Years ago, early 2000s, 24 athletic fields were absolutely a disgrace. And the town had a master plan, and we put a lot of time and effort in bringing our athletic fields to what we think is some of the best around. But that requires a lot of work. And the idea was, well, we're not going to hire people, add more people to the staff. So we do hire some contractors out to cut a lot of these fields to help us. So those costs have increased a little bit. So that's why there's an increase in the parks there. But we maintain most of them ourselves, but we do have contractors that do go out and cut some of the fields for us. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions.
Hi, Mark. Just a general question regarding around town, you have different projects going on. If a resident wanted to find out, hey, they're doing something across the street, I wonder what that project is. Can they go to a source like on your site, on the Norwood site, to find out what they're doing at that time?
Not on a day-to-day basis. On the bigger projects, we'll post, the annual resurfacing contract. This is what to expect this year.
Right.
These are the streets, or the cleaning and lining. These are the streets. But on day-to-day, the best way is call dispatch. We have someone there 24/7 to answer the phone.
Okay.
If that person does not know the answer right there, they'll find it out real quick and get back to that person.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure this under your umbrella, tree trimming and tree cutting down, is that under your umbrella?
Yes.
I'm curious, over the last couple of years, everyone knows, the winds have been aggressive. Has the town taken a different position now that instead of trimming some trees every so often, it makes more sense perhaps just to cut the damn things down, because 2 years down the road, we'll have to trim them all over again. So is that something that's been addressed that way? It seems I've seen more trees being cut down than trimmed.
You're seeing more cut down than trim?
Yeah, we had a couple on Hoyle Street, for instance, that
Yeah.
it ruined the whole look of the street, actually.
Yeah, there was some major trees there that,
Exactly.
became a threat, and we will take them down. We'll trim them. We do not like taking down a live tree. I mean, we've had people say that tree blocks the sun to my garden and I want it out of there. Well, we don't do that. Probably just don't like trees at all. We trim them ourselves. We do have a contractor that helps us on that. But the bigger tree trimming you may or may not see is the light department does a fabulous job trimming trees around wires. And that's one of the reasons, we're so lucky in this town that when we have an outage, it's very short-lived if it's because of tree, because they've done such a great job getting ahead of the game and trimming trees, making sure those wires are safe. We're a non-municipal area, like Edison or National Grid or Eversource, they might not put that kind of level of effort in that they do. So not always lucky that way. But to answer your question, we'd rather keep the tree up there.
Good.
We want to trim it, and we want to plant as many trees as possible.
Good. Okay, thanks.
I've always found that when somebody doesn't want the town to do work to a tree, they insist it's their tree. And then a couple years later, when that tree dies, they call me and they say that it's the town's tree and I need to take it down. And sure enough, I've had people do it at the start and the end of the season. It was, I saw your DPW out there, stay away from my tree. And then the end of the summer, no, the tree's dying, the town needs to take its tree. So other questions for Mark? All right, thank you, Mark. And Mark's gonna be here. Yep. We're gonna now go through, sorry about that. General government, health and human services, culture and recreation. So this is the rec department, the library, and the what we call the town hall department. So some of these go quickly, but feel free to grab my attention if anyone has any questions. Starting right at the top, the selectmen. This is the selectmen's office budget. This is not a salary for the selectmen. That's the staff that provides service in the office. Every now and then everyone looks at that and thinks the selectmen get paid a whole lot of money. They serve without compensation, as do all elected officials in Norwood. But this just is the small office budget as well as the staff in the office. This is the general manager's office. So my office consists of obviously myself. I have an assistant manager, an executive assistant, and an analyst. The purchasing division, if you will, is part of the manager's office. There's 2.5 full-time staff there. There's a switchboard operator in town hall, who, if you call town hall, that position is budgeted in the manager's office. It's always a question of, do you want to separate it out? Do you want to include it all in? But those have all traditionally been considered part of the manager's office. Up until 4 years ago, animal control was budgeted in my office. We never really figured out why, so we've given it over to the health department. And then again, you'll see here, I have probably a larger operating budget than most of the town hall departments, but they're still comparatively very small. Most of the office budgets really are just office budgets, training, office supplies, paper, and things like that. The Finance Commission, again, that salary is just the clerk for the Finance Commission. They don't receive a stipend for their work. And the bulk of their operating budget is actually the cost of our annual audit. We just include it in the Finance Commission's budget. No major changes there. Finance and accounting is the town accountant's office. In Massachusetts, town accountants technically are auditors, but our town accountant, Meg LeMay, who's here, our finance director, is a CPA. We have our own really interesting set of municipal finance laws that we have to follow in Massachusetts. The state has its own municipal accounting system. Those of you who had a chance to go to municipal finance 101 heard a little bit about how we just have some rules we have to live by that the state makes us follow. Again, the salaries and operating is standard throughout the Commonwealth. Only a 4-person department. The assessor's office, Tim McDonough is our chief assessor. No major change in his operating, in his budget overall. The treasurer's office, slight decrease overall. We were able to contract out for a better rate on banking services. We had one banking provider who, for years, we didn't actually have to pay for banking services. They were bought out by another regional bank that decided to start charging municipalities. It cost us in the first year, probably $40,000 or $50,000. We quickly moved money around and changed banking services. Interestingly enough, on the annual town meeting warrant, there's always an article in there that allows the treasurer to enter into compensated balancing account agreements. That's literally a 100-year-old statement, but that has to be in there to allow the treasurer to move money in between banks, because for some reason about 100 years ago it was considered an appropriation. So if the town has $10 million in this bank account and they want to move it over here, somebody 100 years ago said, well, that's an appropriation. The treasurer needs authority from town meeting to be able to do that. Everyone just includes it on their warrant as sort of a perfunctory item, but the treasurer's office collects all town revenue at some point in time, goes through the treasurer's office, is reconciled through the treasurer's office. So all $250 million that the town will take in a given year, all goes through the treasurer's office. It's also where you pay your bills. Town council is our town attorney. So this budget line here, it's not a salary. We contract out for town council services. We have our general town council. We have a separate labor council. We have special counsel for the airport. There's a few other legal services throughout the budget. The light department, of course, is separate, and they have their own separate special counsel. The schools use counsel for, again, specialty litigation. I shouldn't say litigation, specialty legal matters. Townwide, we probably spend closer to maybe $800,000 if you put all legal services in one line. But again, the assessor uses, for instance, out of his budget, a lawyer who just does tax abatements in front of the appellate tax board. So it's not really considered part of our general legal budget. About every 10 years or so, we'll review who we have doing counsel for us. So one of the areas that we're not required to go through a procurement process, we can simply interview and pick the firm that we think is best. We've used Murphy Hesse as our general town counsel for well over 25 years. They're a well-known municipal law firm. We use Merrick O'Connell for labor counsel, and then we use Anderson Krieger for airport counsel. We only brought them a few years on a few years ago. They're one of a handful of firms in the country that actually handle airports and airport litigation. We've been increasing this budget every year just really to reflect reality. Sometimes the budget increases we look back and we say, gee, you know, we're spending $500,000 in this area. Is that wrong? Is that too much? Or do we just need to make sure that the budget matches reality? Human resources consists of our shared human resources department. 2 years ago, the school department, we moved a generalist over from the school department's business office to the HR office, and we now handle a lot of the HR functions for the school department to try to give them access to a full HR department. The school didn't have its own HR department. We have a single benefits package. It's all the same. It goes to the same place. It's all the same benefits. So there's a little bit of a telephone game where they go to somebody in the school business office and they have a question about health insurance, and they'd say, okay, well, let me call the person over at the town, and they call the person over at the town. And we kind of eliminated the telephone game by just being able to move people around and now have sort of a centralized HR department. Probably an area we'll need to grow in time. We are trying to make an adjustment for some additional part-time staff. Recruitment's starting to become a challenge for us. It started to become a challenge for many municipalities a couple of years ago. We luckily were a little bit slower to that. But what used to be you could post a job on the Mass Municipal website and get 30 applicants without a problem. We're now down to that 5 or 6, and you're seeing it in private industry as well. So we need some additional help as we now actually have to go out and do recruiting. Before it was fairly easy to just say, oh, there's the job, and we get a ton of applicants. So it's proving a challenge, but we're certainly not alone in that challenge. IT budget, this is for the town's central IT budget. Included in the costs are our municipal, our financial software. It's a software called Munis. That's our ERP software. So this handles all of our ERP software. The schools do have their own separate technology division, and the light department has some things, again, that they do separately. But no significant changes other than we're starting to see software costs increase, particularly for smaller software suites. For a while, it was almost like it was its own little industry, and if you needed a software package that could run some rec programs or do dog licenses, they were cheap. But there's so much money flowing into software companies specifically for government entities. I was at a managers conference last year and met somebody who said that they actually just work for an investment firm looking to invest and buy out different software companies that specifically sell to municipalities. So I used to love buying software where you can get it cheap, and now you sit down with them and every software company wants $30,000 or $40,000 for every stupid little gadget they have. And it's becoming a challenge for the things we need, but it makes us have to be a little bit more cost conscious on some of them. Town clerk and elections and registrations. Our wonderful town clerk, Mary Rufolin, is here. I often pick on her budget as an example of why most of these town hall budgets are relatively small. It's a 4-person office with only about a $15,000 operating budget. The elections and registration budget does pay for poll workers in the annual election process as well as part of the salary. So you could combine this all into one budget, but we tend to separate out the elections. It is a budget that oscillates quite a bit based on how many elections we'll actually have in a given year. Each election costs us several $1,000s. You're paying the poll workers, you're paying police details. There's some other work that goes on. But in the grand scheme of things, less than $500,000 for everything the clerk's office does, as well as running a couple of fantastic elections a year. Certainly well worth it. Community development consists of there's a planning director, an office manager, the environmental planner, and an assistant planner, as well as the community preservation assistant works out of this department and is under this department, but is actually paid for by community preservation fund. So it's our planning department. I tend to use the term community development. The increase is not really an increase. It's just a rebudgeting of money that the Conservation Commission has every year. We relocated it into their budget. We put $10,000 a year into a land acquisition fund. Conservation commissions are the only entities allowed, other than the town, of course, with the board of selectmen and town meeting, to actually acquire property. So every year, a little bit of money goes into a fund, so that way, if they have an opportunity to acquire open space, they're able to acquire open space. Any other process has to go through town meeting, has to go through the board of selectmen. It's a much more complicated process. Annual town report. Again, we have some of these smaller budget lines that we could probably condense somewhere else. This is the cost for the annual town report. Some of you have probably read that annual town report, cover to cover, I'm sure. We produce it every year. I know sometimes as you read through it, you say, gee, it just seems like a lot of information about some statistics and some of it's interesting, but really what the annual town reports are, they're a great historic document. We were always looking back 30, 40, 50, 100 years. We have all of our annual reports back to 1870s, and we're in the process of preserving some of them. We've reduced the number we print every year as fewer and fewer people actually want hard copies. And we're not unlike most other towns where you walk into a closet and there's, 4 cases of the 2007 annual town report that we forgot to give out. And other times you order a couple of hundred more than you needed. We cut way down on what we order basically to make sure we can give them out. Town meeting members can get them. We have it digitally, of course, and then we can put some in the library, the clerk's office, and a couple other offices to make sure we always have them. But we've reduced over the years. I think this line 5 or 6 years ago was probably $6,000 or $7,000. We continue to reduce how many we actually physically print and distribute. General government, this is a bit of a catch-all for some of our professional services related to town hall. We pay for some printing costs for town meeting. Some of the costs for town meeting probably cost us 20 grand a year to run town meeting if we have 2 or 3 sessions throughout the year. So a little bit of a catch-all for the general government budget. We're probably under budgeted in professional services in general. We sometimes say consulting, sometimes the line will say consultants. We never hire consultants that just come in and say, well, I think you should do this, or I think you should do that. Usually it's engineering services. It might be survey services. It might be that we need an appraisal for a piece of property that we're looking at. We generically use the term consultant, but I know sometimes people think we just bring folks in to tell us what to do. It might be something like a staffing study. It might be something like, as we mentioned earlier, professional or public safety staff analysis, things like that. Other towns tend to have a little bit more money in their engineering or design function. We tend not to as much in Norwood. We tend to appropriate it when we're looking at a project. It'd be great if the facilities department, for instance, had more money for engineering and design. The challenge there, it comes into competition with everything else in the budget as well. The building department, this is for the inspections division. Gary Pelletier is our building commissioner. The inspections department has an admin assistant, full-time building commissioner, assistant commissioner, or assistant inspector. We have a full-time plumbing inspector and a full-time electrical inspector, as well as some part-time and per diem inspectors. We're a big, busy town, and I know sometimes we like to think of Norwood as small and bucolic. We have a lot of commercial buildings and businesses in town. Inspecting and issuing permits for residential homes is actually fairly easy and straightforward. When you're talking about, so the same department that comes to your house and tells you how to build your deck and make sure that you are, putting your outlets the right level from the ground up, is the same department that's going to make sure Norwood Hospital is built safely, that Moderna is building their facility safely. They will inspect our middle school. So there, with the commercial base we have, it's quite an active and busy department. They bring in a lot of money. They bring in way more money than they actually cost to operate. This year is a particularly big year with some permits from Moderna and the hospital and more anticipated. I think this year you're going to see the building department bring in probably over $3 million in permits. So even if you add in the benefit cost, let's say if they're $800,000, $850,000, and that's a huge number, they're bringing in 3 times what they're going to actually cost us this year. So not that we do it to generate revenue, they do generate a fair amount of revenue. Emergency management, just a small budget here. we use this just for some of our emergency management functions. We have to set up a shelter. We pay for a couple of our, we have some emergency phone lines. We do maintain some emergency supplies. We generally are fortunate with having our light department that we don't have to shelter too often, but I can tell you every time there's a bad storm coming or a large storm coming, the emergency management team, which is certainly myself, the public safety chiefs, the light department, public health, and public works, our fear is, do we have to shelter people? Do we have to move people? So this pays for some of the planning and some of the supplies to be able to do that in the event we have to. I think the last time we maybe set up the Civic as a shelter, maybe 2 or 3 years ago after a storm, we had probably 30 or 40 houses that we knew were going to be out for 8 or 10 hours. And we'll usually set it up as a shelter. We haven't had to actually set up cots and shelter people overnight. Stacey, it's probably been quite a while.
Very long.
It's been a while, which is a good thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of setting up the Civic or one of our other facilities with food and a place for people to take a shower and charge their devices. But again, we're very fortunate with the light department. We tend not to lose power. Our biggest fear, other than a major incident, would be obviously a power outage in the winter, where there's a life safety issue there. People don't have power in their homes. A mild June day, like the June 2020 storm, other than dealing with the immense amount of water and the damage it caused, it's easier to stay in a house overnight in a warm, muggy summer day than it is in the winter when we're worried about having to shelter people. I'll talk in a later slide where probably at some point should have a full-time emergency management director. For a town our size, to not have one is a little unique, but we've been fortunate having our own light department. It makes things so much easier. I was sharing with somebody recently a story. I was in Connecticut. I was in Cohasset at a manager's meeting just about a week ago, and I was driving by their fire station. I pointed out, I think to Mike, I said, "Oh, I've been to their fire station before. I brought them sandwiches a couple years ago during a storm." He says, "Really, what happened?" I said, "Well, we had a bad storm, and by 9 a.m. the next morning, Norwood was fine. We had maybe 6 houses out." And I called my friend who's manager of Cohasset, and he'd been up for 24 hours. The town was destroyed. They had no power. All the MBTA lines, the gates had gone down, and they couldn't get them up, and nobody was answering from the MBTA, so people were weaving around them. They had trees. I mean, it was a disaster. It was an absolute war zone. So I picked up sandwiches, drove in, and said, "Hey guys, here's some sandwiches," because we were done by 9 o'clock the next morning. And even the towns around us, Foxborough and Canton and Sharon, they were probably 40, 50% without power. We were right there. Mark Ryan mentioned earlier, we have dispatch available at DPW 24/7. We maintain a 24-hour shift worker at DPW. There's a DPW employee on duty 24/7. That's unique for towns. And when I first came here to Norwood, I said to Mark, "Mark, that sounds crazy. We're paying money to have somebody there 24 hours a day." He said, "I'll tell you what, Tony, give it 6 months. And if after 6 months you don't think it's worth it, we'll get rid of it." I will not live in another town that doesn't have a shift worker on their DPW. I don't know how I did it most of my life. If for nothing else, you have a small problem at 8 o'clock at night, the DPW can take care of it. They respond quicker to water calls, to sewer calls. When we have an emergency and a storm hits and it's unexpected, DPW is right there getting their other folks there. They're able to get around, get supplies pre-positioned, start blocking roads off because there's somebody already there. And from a quality of life standpoint, it's as simple as, hey, there's a trash barrel overflowing. The shift worker will be right there to take care of it. You're driving home at night and a Christmas tree around Christmas time walked into the road. Who can you call? The DPW is there to take care of it. It's the single best investment we make dollar-wise for the quality of life. And in the summer, when we got a lot going on, we have a lot going on in town year-round. But in particular in the summer, you will see some of those shift workers, and they are running from park to park to park to change trashes and to bring equipment to fix things, to make sure that they're calling somebody saying, "Hey, this bathroom has gone down. We need this." They're always out there moving. It's a fantastic quality of life issue. Helps us in the emergency management realm too, where there's somebody there to respond right away, start getting folks to where we need to go. Traffic control, fire alarm, and street lighting. Even though we own our own light department, we're legally required for not only street lights, but all our own electricity. It's funny, if you actually read the statutes around municipal light departments, that's the one thing that's clear in the law is the town must budget for its own electricity. So I don't know, 100 years ago, they were worried that everyone would get free electricity. There's anything wrong with it, but that's the law. So this is the actual charge for electricity for street lights. And this is the maintenance of most of our traffic control and fire alarm system that the light department does do. We are required to make sure that they're charging us for it. The number tends to oscillate quite a bit year to year based on what we're doing. And candidly, we know that the light department probably doesn't always make sure they charge the town for every single moment that they're out there, but we are required to make sure we pay for it and budget for it as well. The municipal airport, Mark Raymond, our airport manager, is here. No significant change in the airport budget, a couple of reductions to manage some costs, and some change in the salaries based just on people changing steps in lane. Mark has been with us about 20 years, and he took over last year as the airport manager. The town does own and operate the airport. We really manage the facilities. All the planes and the helicopters, they're private planes, they're private hangars. The way the town owns the land under the airport is a little unique. It was given to the town in the 40s after the Second World War, with the idea that it would always be used for aviation purposes. It would have to revert back if we ever didn't use it for aviation purposes. So my dream of putting a theme park there or something was dashed when I came to town, found out that it's pretty much always going to have to be an airport. The FAA actually controls all plane activity once a plane takes off the ground. So we know we do get complaints from neighbors in different parts of town, different time about planes flying over it. The town itself really can't control that. We cannot direct a plane once it takes off. That's 100% the FAA, which is a federal agency that seems to have more power than God and nobody wants to deal with. We really manage the grounds of the facilities. Not to say we don't work with the vendors that are down there and the flight schools and neighbors to try to keep it peaceful. I live in Norwood. I've been woken up by a plane at 7:30 in the morning. Sometimes you're laying there in bed, you hear it and you're like, oh, it's a plane. But airports are airports. It's been there for 80 years. And as long as planes are still flying, probably be there in for another 80 years. Every now and then people hear about a runway reconstruction or runway expansion and they panic and they think we're going to bring in jumbo jets. And I always remind people that that's certainly something we could probably do. If you wanted to bring in jumbo jets to Norwood, we could make it happen. You have to relocate Route 1, 95, part of Blue Hills, and probably take out a couple schools in Canton. So give me $20–30 billion and we can make it happen. That would never happen. The airport is designed for the type of planes it receives. Maybe some enhancements could get something larger, but the big jets that we're flying to Europe, flying cross country, never going to happen unless for some reason they want to get rid of Route 1 and 95. Now one other point, the airport budget gets looked at usually every other year by the Finance Commission does a report. Selectman Bob Donnelly actually started about 8 or 10 years ago and they made some changes. It roughly covers its costs, comes in as general revenue, but the airport does bring in several $100,000 a year in revenue from landing fees and leases and other items. The health department, we have Stacy Lane, who was our health director. No significant changes here. We've moved the hazardous waste program. That's our household hazardous waste day. The Board of Health has volunteered and run that program for many, many years, twice a year when you bring up your household hazardous waste items. Just as we're realigning duties, we've moved it over to the DPW. It was started as a health department initiative several decades ago, and they did a great job with it. The Board of Health asked me to lead that responsibility. And of course, when we don't know what to do with something, we usually just give it to Public Works. But as Public Works otherwise runs the Winter Street recycling facility, we felt it was more appropriate for it to be in Marsh's portfolio, and they're going to do a great job taking it over as well. Public Health consists of, there's a director, there's the assistant director. We have our sanitarian who does all of our restaurant inspections. Animal control is under Public Health, as well as we do tobacco control through a grant. We have public health nurses that handle a lot of, when we're doing vaccines, they would do vaccines. A lot of other functions that public health does, as well as we're sharing a number of regional grant positions. We share regional epidemiologists, regional health specialists, and a few other positions. Similar to if you go back to 9/11, there was a tragedy in the country, there was a significant incident, and then for years afterwards, a lot of money flowed to public safety and to Homeland Security. And the same thing with the pandemic, a lot of money is flown to public health, and we're trying to get what grants we can get, use them for the benefit of the community. But it's also given us a chance to really say, okay, we're getting all this grant money for these different functions. We're able to see what really works and kind of take an a la carte approach and say, I don't know, we don't know if we're going to take a risk and hire an epidemiologist one year. A lot of towns have them, but you know, we've got a grant to share one. We're now able to see and evaluate, does this work for us? Is this something we would want to do long time? And it's been probably a great 18 months. We've been working with about 8 or 9 grant funded positions. And what we're really seeing is the need is for some social services. We don't really have a great referral system built yet in town. We're getting there. Teddy, our veterans agent, takes care of veterans, can do it. The senior center does it for seniors, but somebody generally calling for assistance, it's not something towns are uniquely set up to do, at least towns our size. So we're finding there's a need for that, and we're aligning some of these grant positions in our internal operations to be able to at least have some referral services for that. But we're also seeing a need for increased just traditional public health inspections and responding to resident issues and quality of life issues as well. And that's part of a broader shift we're trying to make in the fire department, in inspections, and in public health, to really focusing on some of the quality of life issues. Last year in the fire budget, we added a second fire inspector because we've always had the deputy chief who handled plan review and some inspections, and then one fire inspector, but we're really just reactionary. So we're trying to be a little bit more proactive. Yep.
Speaking of public health, is there any oversight from public health on businesses that deal with the life sciences?
There is. So labs in particular are rated according to, there's a scale. Stacy could probably explain it better than me. Stacy has to convene to investigate or to look at labs and certify that those labs are gone on. There's like a level 1 to 4 bio rating for a lab. Moderna's I think a 2. It's very low. I think the worst thing that they would have there is like strep. So there's no high chemicals or anything like that. But that's for a lab. If they're just doing sort of paper R&D, it's really no different than an administrative service. Stacy, you want to add in there?
Yes, they're required to have, if they have, they're working with recombinant DNA, they're required to have a biosafety committee, and that consists of the chairman of the board of health, health director, and someone from the community. And we meet maybe twice a year, once a year, depending on their projects, and they go over all the safety data, what the project is, and we vote on it. So that is required. So Moderna, for instance.
Yeah. Thanks. Good question. Council on Aging, Carrie McCarthy is our Senior Center Director. She's here. This facility, we've been having a lot of public meetings there. We actually did these meetings there last year. The Senior Center provides a significant amount of services to seniors. It's both a drop-in center. It's a center of active aging. There's a lot of activity there. They do a senior transportation program. A lot of other really great programs for seniors. They do dances twice a month. I go to some of the dances. They're a lot of fun. I'd encourage you to go to them if you haven't. One of the latest changes we've been seeing in the senior center with the Council on Aging is a few years ago, we started our senior medical transport program. And it sort of came out of, a little bit out of COVID, but what happened is traditional cab services sort of dropped off. So seniors have struggled to find cabs. Uber and Lyft are sometimes available, but they're very expensive and they're not necessarily as reliable, especially for our older seniors, especially some of our more frail seniors. We've run a bus program for years, but the senior bus is not really effective at getting folks to and from medical appointments. And that's a huge need among the older senior population in town, is getting to and from medical appointments. It's what keeps them in their home. It has a positive health impact. We actually did a study earlier in the year on 6 months of the senior medical transport program. And I think out of that 6 months, there were something like 180 trips to a dialysis center. So we looked at what we were spending on the program versus what it would be if we had to call an Uber or Lyft. And we found out we were either on par or better. And the further away you were going, we were actually doing it cheaper than it would cost a senior if they had to call an Uber. We also looked at the income level of seniors using the program, and they're generally lower income seniors. I don't think anyone reported making $200,000 a year at 87 years old and using a free service that the senior center offers. So it's been a great program. We had one vehicle. We've added a second vehicle. We're going to actually communicate with some of the offices we're bringing seniors to about whether or not they want to donate to the program, since they're obviously getting some money for it. And then we're going to eventually look at adding and continue to expand the service because it's full up. One of the goals we have with the second vehicle is to eventually be able to offer service to medical facilities in Boston if needed. There are a lot of seniors who live independently and they just need a ride with a companion to, maybe go get a foot surgery. That's a service we want to be able to offer, particularly seniors if they don't have family in the area. Getting the medical appointments and trying to get into Boston, especially if you need somebody to drive you back, ends up becoming a challenge. Carrie, is there anything you want to add? I know I always undersell the senior center, but.
You do, no. No, you said everything. The transportation is the biggest need, I think, and it's not really the older seniors anymore. It's somebody who's maybe 65 and has had a knee replacement and can't drive to PT or doesn't have someone to, so they'll use us temporarily. People who are going to a parking lot that they can't navigate very well, so they would use our service so that they can get to the appointment. So I think transportation, including security, are the biggest two needs right now.
Veteran services, Massachusetts is unique in that we actually offer local assistance to veterans directly through the town. There's no other state that does that. It's a constitutional mandate in Massachusetts. So Ted Mulvihill is our veterans agent. He himself is a veteran, and low-income veterans are able to go to his office, and there's a variety of different resources. Sometimes it's direct assistance. Sometimes it's help paying for food, for medicine. He can also connect you with the VA. Teddy has a wonderful way of being able to get through the bureaucracy of the VA to get veterans on their VA benefits. If you are a veteran, you should call Teddy. Even if you serve for just a couple of months, call Teddy, see if there's anything he can do for you, or at least make the connection. If you have a family member who is of any age, really, because it's veterans of any age, and they live in Norwood, have them reach out to Teddy and just say, hey, is there anything you can do? And just meet them. We find seniors all the time who come in, or people who come in, just to have a conversation, and all of a sudden they find out that they're actually eligible for some sort of a benefit, and now they're getting $400 a month towards food security or some other grant program. The town pays 25% of that direct benefit cost and the state reimburses us 75%. One of the reasons Teddy's operating budget, most of that is that direct service that we provide. It oscillates year to year based on sort of where his client base is. It's a requirement, we have to pay it. Some years it goes up, some years it goes down. We try to just peg it around what's been average. We would move money around because we're required to pay it, but the Commonwealth does reimburse us 75%, and it is unique to Massachusetts. We have the library. We have Clayton Cheever, the library director here. The library budget's up a bit, but most of it is for a correction to last year's budget. Sometimes numbers get miscorrected or misentered or miscued. So it was a correction for something that was inadvertently removed last year. We also are adding expanding weekend service at the library. Clayton, you want to talk about just for a minute, briefly, the weekend service expansions?
We're looking to expand. It can be open Saturdays and Sundays year round. Right now, we've had to close. A number of years ago, we used to have Sunday service year round, and currently this year and several years have been closed on Sundays between Memorial Day and Columbus Day. So looking to continue the Sunday service. I actually expand Sunday service by an hour every Sunday, so there's a fair window for people to be able to visit us during. And then also right now we've been closed on Saturdays in July and August. And there was a thought that everybody left Norwood in the summertime. That's no longer the case. We know Saturdays really, when we look at how much we're seeing by the hour, we're seeing more people visiting us and borrowing materials on Saturdays than typically any other day. So we continue offering this valuable service on Saturday. It's also helpful if we see hotter times. We helped that a couple times in the last year as a place for people to just see refuge in the heat, and having planning to be open on the weekends will give us a greater ability to respond if we have a super hot July or August again.
Absolutely. We did open the senior center. Sorry, we opened the library as a cooling shelter. I think this past summer and the summer before. Something new that we started doing when it gets really, really hot. There's a benefit to folks to knowing that there's somewhere you can go where there's air conditioning. Sometimes your AC breaks, or some people don't have that air conditioning on those really, really hot days. And we decided, instead of doing it sort of at the senior center, which was otherwise closed, or doing it at the Civic, we said, let's do it at the library, because there's actually other stuff for folks to do. Because it's one thing to walk in from the extreme heat and say, okay, it's nice and cool in here. Well, you can take out a book, you can take out something from the library of things, you can go on a computer, you can go on your own Wi-Fi. They recently boosted up their Wi-Fi at the library. They have some ridiculous level of Wi-Fi that the light department gave them that they wouldn't even give me at town hall. I don't know how that happened, but that's a separate conversation for a separate day. But in the library building, at some point in the next few years, is going to need some work. We're doing an existing conditions report on that building because it's a beautiful building. It is starting to have some aging in a few different areas. And about 3 years ago, we were going to start painting the interior of the library, and there's some water damage. We sort of took a step back and we started looking at it. And at some point this year, we're going to try to do the exact existing conditions study to make sure before we start doing anything to the library, we really take a look at everything that's needed. And either not throw good money after bad, or not fix the roof when we realize it's a foundation problem, or not paint the building and realize. So with the building as historic and beautiful as it is, we're going to be very cautious before we just say, let's just go, knock out a couple of walls and try to fix something. Recreation department, the recreation director couldn't be here tonight. Mike Rosenfield in as the assistant, the acting director there for a couple of months. This is all of our recreation programs as well as the civic. Slight reduction in staffing costs due to some staff turnover, otherwise fairly flat. The Civic is open most of the year. It's a great workout facility. You could never use the gym at the Civic. So the Civic is the building right in front of the DPW garage. It's been our rec center for about 40 years. It actually used to be a National Guard armory. There is a gym in there. It's good equipment. It's the same quality equipment you're going to get at any gym in town. It's a very cheap membership for residents, and there's a discount for seniors. I encourage you to check out the gym if you haven't. It's got a wonderful basketball facility, and there's a lot of children's programs that go on at the rec center as well. Questions on the rec budget? All right, celebrations. This is just our line that covers some of our annual call-up town celebrations, the 4th of July parade, some of our concerts, as well as some of our holiday decorations. We unfortunately have left this budget flat for probably 20 years, and the problem is it finally caught up with us. This year, we have about a $20,000 increase, mostly for the 4th of July parade. We had been budgeting about $20,000, raising about $20,000, and then on a hope and a prayer, the other $10,000 or $15,000 it cost us, we would desperately beg, borrow, and steal to try to get through. It's just a realization that this budget is probably going to have to go up at least that amount for the next 2 to 3 years to make sure we can continue to offer these services to the community. The 4th of July parade, there's other costs for overtime that are included in that, but we have a great parade. We want to be able to continue to do it as well. Just a kind of quick note on a couple of sort of unmet needs. We tend to always present a budget that's a budget showing what we need to operate the next year. We don't just, I certainly don't in my department say, hey guys, what do you all want next year? It's never what do you want. It's usually tell me what you don't need this year so I can find somewhere to cut. But that's not uncommon for towns. So it's not to say that we don't have needs or things that we're not addressing that we'd want to address at some point in the future. Mark talked about his road construction budget. We get about $900,000 from the state, about $850,000. We budget $675,000, and we're on a 5-year bond program to really get our roads to where we want them to be and then maintain them there. But the number's been flat in the budget going from 23 into 24, and it was fairly flat the year before. At some point, inflation is really going to start to eat away at that. And the progress we've made, I think 5 years ago, we maybe only had $150,000, $200,000 in the budget. We've built it up. Part of that was the override we did 5 years ago. But if we can't find the flexibility to make sure we're increasing that and keeping pace with inflation, it's just going to squeeze it. We're going to find ourselves in the same position we did about 10 years ago. I mentioned software costs. The facilities department, we did talk about a couple days ago. Their staffing level's been flat since we created it. We didn't create facilities just to save a buck. We wanted to really take a better look at how we're maintaining our buildings going forward. And we had some plans of where we wanted to go. We've really focused on operations the last couple of years, but the staffing has been flat in the department for a couple of years. And if we really want to move to a level where we're maintaining our buildings that they can get to the end of their useful life and still have value, we're at some point going to have to address facility staffing. We talked about community events being underfunded. The legal services line is barely keeping pace with inflation. I try to throw lawyer bills out and not pay them, and then they always seem to remember that I owe them money and they come after us for it. But we're trying to build some of these lines up to where they really will be. The challenge we face is on about a $35 million budget that we're trying not to have overall exceed more than 3 or 3.5%. It's hard to comprehensively solve one problem one year and say, okay, we know the legal services budget needs to go up. Put it up $300,000. We'll never have to worry about this problem again, because then how do I deal with what the needs are? The police department, the fire department, public works, and all the other town hall departments. We're finally starting to see, I mentioned professional services. We're finally starting to see some of the inflationary increases hit public works and the facilities department. They're our two largest operating departments. So when you looked at police in terms of their operating budget, when you looked at police and fire, all salaries in a much smaller operating budget. Facilities is much closer in public works to 30 or 40% operating costs. So that starts to eat into their flexibility. Every year when Mark has $30,000 budgeted for sidewalk repairs, and then it's that same amount the next year, and then the same amount the next year, and same amount the next year. I once made a joke during the budget presentation. Somebody said, you cut the concrete line, what are you going to do? And I said, they'll just mix more sand into it. And they go, you can do that? I said, no, you can't do that. We're going to do less. So it becomes a challenge. In terms of staffing, we are probably only up 5 or 6 positions net, and the net's a little bit less because of the dispatch regionalization over the last 5 years. We're unique for a community our size that we don't have an emergency management director. About 6 years ago, we had a part-time solid waste coordinator position that was eliminated. We haven't been able to put that back in yet. When you think about trash being a $2.5 million cost center in the budget, we don't even have a full-time person managing that $2.5 million budget. It falls to Mark and his team to do it in addition to everything else. And with trash costs, we've budgeted 10%. We think we're going to come in at 10% with waste management. But what towns are seeing and what we're likely to see is that's going to stay and be probably 10 to 15% each year for the next 4 or 5 years. We're aggressively courting other couriers, but it's just not working. Everyone's seeing roughly 50% over 5 years for trash costs. We had a great provision in our contract where trash costs wouldn't exceed, or recycling costs wouldn't exceed trash costs. I think waste management was not happy with that, and we've had a good couple of years. And certainly I think they're coming back with that, but unfortunately there's no other vendors out there saying, yeah, don't worry, we'll give it to you for 10% less than you're paying now. They're as bad, if not worse. Not to mention waste management, despite the fact that I don't always think they like me because I don't give them money in the middle of the year and other towns do, they do offer a great service. We have great trash service in town. It's reliable, it's consistent. If there's a problem, they take care of it. So they've been a good vendor to work with. Other towns are looking at having full-time communications and civic engagement staff. We haven't really gotten there yet. Dr. Thompson and I have talked about possibly sharing somebody at some future budget year. But again, when you have a tight budget, it's hard to say, this is where we want to grow and this is how we want to do things better when we're struggling to fund just what we're currently doing. We do know that HR staff is a need for between the town and schools. And remember, I want to talk about one cost center. What do we spend our money on? It's our people. I've been trying to get a GIS position for 5 years. This year wasn't the year. I can hope it'll happen next year. Again, for the complexity of our mapping system and how much information goes into our mapping system, we've made great progress. We're unique that we don't have a full-time GIS technician. DPWs, as Mark mentioned, his staff is the same as it was a decade or more ago. They have taken on more and more over time. I mean, Central Street is just an example of, it may not seem like a lot to set up, but it takes probably 4 or 5 guys from the DPW a day or 2 to do. Well, all that labor time I've lost out of what we're doing. We've taken on fields about 20 years ago that we didn't used to do. With the facility switch, they've taken on more fields than they used to do. So DPW is one area that we continue to ask to do more and more, and they've risen to the challenge admirably, but the staffing level just hasn't changed. And at some point, additional IT staff are going to be needed. Software is changing. The nature of IT is changing. We don't maintain evening IT services. So in the evening, when you see something set up like this, not that we need an IT person, it's the staff that are doing it. Or we're lucky that Joe Kidd, the school IT director, lives locally. But when you think about a $215 million operation, if there's a typical meeting on a Thursday night, it's kind of like, well, there's no one here. Everyone's gone home for the day. So at some point, restructuring our IT and looking at if we could have a consolidated IT department that could just provide some better services and a little bit more layered staffing would probably be better. Towns are unique, right? 75 years ago, we didn't have an IT department. A lot of companies weren't around 75 years ago. So businesses that, just came up in the last 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years, we've been in business 150 years under the same charter since 1914. So these things sort of tend to grow slowly when it's like, hey, we're going to get one of those new computer things. And remember, Town Hall, 1928 was built. So our main administrative building was built before anyone used a computer. And it probably operated for 50 years before they put a computer in. I think Bob Thornton actually brought the first computerized accounting system in. But I don't want to pick on any of my department heads who may have remembered Town Hall before we had computers. But and then last thing I mentioned, it is time to do a public safety staffing study. The community has changed. The growth level has changed in the last 10 or 15 years. And it's been a while since we've looked at a public safety staffing study. That doesn't necessarily mean that staffing is going to go up or down. It's just you have an outside consultant. Usually it's they specialize in public safety, come in, look at your runs, look at what you're doing, look at your staffing and say, are you able to meet your service needs and where should you be staffed based on your call volume and based on what you're responding to and the unique conditions of your community. When you think about Moderna, where, it was Polaroid many, many years ago, and then it was sort of downsized and there were maybe 600-700 employees up there between Putnam and some of the other operations. And then by the end of the year, there's going to be 3,000 employees up there. All the changes along Route 1, all the housing units we've had in the last 10 years. Even though our population is roughly flat with where it was about 50 years ago, Norwood's 31,000 census population doesn't account for the fact that our daytime population is around 70,000 in Norwood. So during a typical workday, Norwood is a very, very busy town. There's a lot of people in town shopping, working, buying goods, cutting through here. I think, Manhattan Street alone is, I think the traffic count averages 20,000 people a day. So think about that. There's 20,000 cars that go down Manhattan Street on a given day. A couple of things on the horizon. We're starting our master plan process. Actually, town meeting members will be getting probably sort of a little recruitment brochure at town meeting to submit your resume if you're interested in being on the master plan committee. In the next year or two, we'll probably have to look at whether or not the new middle school is going to have any increased costs. It's a new building. Staffing levels change. We're moving to 5th grade up there. There might be a need for more facility staff. There might be a need for other staff. So the new building might come with X number of $100,000 in additional staff costs. In terms of capital, a couple of things that we always keep in mind that we haven't quite gotten to yet. Stormwater infrastructure. There's a stormwater utility study committee that presented to the Board of Selectmen Tuesday night talking about the ever-growing backlog of stormwater work that needs to be done in town to help prevent and reduce flooding and make us ready for the future. That's going to come at a cost. There's probably $37 million worth of, I don't want to necessarily call it deferred maintenance. It's projects we haven't done on the stormwater side, and we're in a similar boat to many other towns, but at some point we have to do something. The downtown streetscapes, folks used to criticize my predecessor, John Carrollson. He wanted to do them every couple of years and it seemed like he was always doing them. The reason is a busy downtown streetscape doesn't really last all that long. So as you're walking through downtown, even parts of South Norwood where we have the nice brick and then the concrete, at some point we're going to have to look at doing that in the next less than 10 years, maybe, before it's going to need to start to get done, or it's going to start to really look bad. So it's good today. It won't be as good in 3 or 4 years, and that's going to be a significant cost, and it's a significant headache to do as well. And always kind of hanging over our heads is a town hall renovation. Town hall was, as I said, built in 1928. The inside has never had a comprehensive renovation. So we have kind of built systems over systems. unfortunate. The manager's office had there was a fire in that office suite about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. So I have a nice, fairly new office, nice lights and everything like that. Some of the other offices still have their asbestos tiles and their asbestos acoustic tiles. The building is old. If you're in town hall and you see the little metal pipes sticking out of the wall that are capped, those are actually old gas lanterns. So what happened when we went away from gas is they just capped them. Hopefully they shut everything off. You never know with a building that's that old. And we just went about our business. So at some point, the building's got to need that level of work. It's functional. It is solid. It's a beautiful building. It's not going to collapse any day soon, but it's totally useless as an actual office building. But that's going to come at a significant price tag when that comes up. But it's not all bad news. Moderna's continuing their expansion. As I said, they're anticipating having 3,000 employees working up there by the end of the year. And when they make change orders to projects and they talk to us, they're not just, hey, we were going to build a wall 18 feet this way, now it's going this way. It's, oh, we realized we needed this other $20 million addition. I mean, they're spending, and big companies like that, when they're in this expansion phase, they always tend to overbuild. Great, we'll take it. More permits, more revenue, let them spend the money, but they're continuing to expand. FM Global's undergoing a large expansion at their facility next to the 4 Points. They're tearing down that front office building that you see there. It's kind of an older building. They've kept it in great shape, but it's actually a 70-year-old office building that they do a lot of their really world-class R&D out of. It's going to be a 310,000 square foot building. It's really going to be the centerpiece of Route 1 once they're done. So that's good additional tax revenue, additional job growth. Cementing them here. They're particularly important because they have that facility. They have the R&D facility in back. They actually own the hotel as well and the Denton Medical Associate. So it's a good sign that they're investing in significantly in town. And I got to tell you, the last couple of weeks driving by the hospital and finally seeing steel beams up, it feels like something is finally happening. Once the hospital, knock on wood, finally gets done, that'll be good both for taxes and jobs coming, those jobs coming back to town. But it's good to see some progress there. And that's all we have for the general government budgets. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has about those department budgets or operations or any of the other departments we saw earlier this evening. Any questions? No? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Tomorrow night, same time, same place, we'll be going over the special town meeting warrant. We'll have our guest stars, Matt Lane and Bill Placido, who will be going through the special town meeting warrant with everyone, and we hope to see you there. If any questions come up about the budget or anything else in the town meeting warrant, feel free to reach out to any department. Just contact the manager's office. We'll be more than happy to help you out. Everyone, thank you all those of you who joined us from Google.